Hey, Sarah, how are you?
Hi, Richard. I'm good. How are you?
Good, good. Nice to see you. It's been a whole week since we've chatted, and a lot of stuff has happened in pop culture.
That's right. And here we are to get into it all.
Well, we'll get into some of it. I want to talk about why Canadians, even though we've all got our elbows up apparently, aren't going to see Canadian films.
When Mike Myers stood on the Saturday Night Live stage and gestured elbows up to all
Mhm.
Canadians watching, we understood the assignment. We are boycotting American travel. We're cleaning out the Canadian made aisles of the grocery store, and we're crashing websites to buy local products. So, why is the Canadian box office a ghost town, Richard?
Well, today on Entertainment is Broken, we're going to have a look at the 40% nosedive in Canadian film revenues. And we're going to ask, if our elbows are up, why are theater seats empty for Canadian movies?
I have to say that Mike Myers moment was huge for me. I am a Mike Myers girly. Like, if I had to pick a single person who influenced my sense of humor, my comedic
Really?
timing, it might be Mike Myers. I am obsessed with him, and I truly think we owe him a big one for that. I really think it had an impact that we needed in the
It
moment.
absolutely had an impact. And I think the video and the ad that he made with Mark Carney did Mark Carney a whole lot of good when it came time for the election. And I think that, Mike, although he's lived in the United States for 30 years or something like that, has a deep connection to Canada still. And, frequently puts little coded messages in the work that he does that only Canadians will understand. And I always kind of love having a look at that stuff.
That's the thing. It's like you can tell, like, that's why I love him. His soul is reflected in his art. You can tell every character he does has a piece of him and a piece of his family, which is very Canadian, very
Mhm.
immigrant family lore, which is, my family. I'm first generation. My mom was born in London. And so, like, that type of sense of humor and the way that my parents grew up was so similar to the way that Mike Myers grew up. So just like the cadence and the language, it it feels so home and family to me, and it reflects like such a particular Canadian culture. And then so to know that like he is that person too, that like you're right, we he was kind of gone. He was like kind of not around, and things were getting hairy, and he took the moment to be like, you know what? No, I'm gonna like make a stand for just like civility and be
Mhm.
like, let's not allow our country to go the way of Trump.
We should also take this moment, though, to acknowledge that his brother Paul, another great Torontonian and Canadian who now lives in California, but has written a great book about John Candy. And it's a bestseller, and it really digs deep into the Canadianness of John Candy and why his style of humor really connected with people. And the book's doing really well. It's called John Candy. I think it's a life in comedy. So check that out as well.
It's so good. And it really exemplifies just how much those SCTV comedians and that era had impact, like in the comedy world. Like everything we know, essentially, in terms of improv and Saturday Night Live and Second City, it's all integrated with those comedians like coming up. And it's like this cute little family that they all had. It's really special stuff. Yeah, the book is really great.
I wanted to, before we get on to talking about why Canadians aren't supporting Canadian films, I just wanted to acknowledge Robert Duvall. Robert Duvall passed away at the age of 95 last week. And the interesting thing about him is that he had this 60-year long career starting off on the stage in New York City. He was a roommate with Dustin Hoffman, and he and Gene
Wow.
Hackman hung out, and yeah. And they were all going out for the same parts, and there was a lot of camaraderie and probably a lot of competition between them as well. Then he plays Boo Radley in To Kill a Mockingbird. I mean, if we talk about one of the films that virtually everyone has seen from that era, it's that movie. And he's in that. And then, of course, there's, the movies he made in the 70s and beyond that I think stand up with anyone else's filmography. He's a guy who People magazine said was Hollywood's number one number two actor because he was always like second or third on the call sheet, you know. But I'll tell you, I interviewed him. I've interviewed him many times, but I interviewed him one particular time that I remember. He was a little bit hard of hearing. So when you did these interviews, you had to sit right next to him. And that's an unusual situation for an interview. Normally, as you know, you're sitting across from one another. You're told, don't look at them in the eye. You're not ever told that, but there's things like that happen. So anyway, we had to sit.
You feel
close
it.
together, and he liked me because I speak in a loud, clear voice. And so I'd ask him a question, and he would start to answer it. But because he was Colonel Kilgore in Apocalypse Now, all I could hear was, I love the smell of napalm in the morning. Or I would ask him something else, and that voice, and I would hear Tom Hagen from The Godfather, or Frank Burns from the movie version of MASH, or on and on and on. I never, ever get starstruck. And in this moment, I think partially because of the sort of intimate way that we were sitting and talking, I had a hard time pulling myself together because I'm sitting next to Tom Hagen, Colonel Kilgore, Frank Burns. It goes on and on and on. And a guy who had just this unparalleled career. So age 95, he passed away last Sunday. And, what an actor. And I love that they're not having a memorial for him. Instead, the family has said, if you want to pay tribute to Robert Duvall, do what he would have done. Go see a movie. Go take a drive in the country, have a walk, talk to a great friend, meet someone for a coffee that you haven't seen forever, and pay tribute to him that way. And I love that. He was an amazing guy who, just made such an impact on me in the films that he was in. I just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge that.
And what a beautiful thing to be that second guy on the call sheet, to take those roles. Often harder roles to do, less flashy, and yet often the heart and soul and meaning of the film. And you can't have the lead without that great scene partner,
Yeah, and you found yourself, though, even though he wasn't perhaps the lead, even when he was on screen with Marlon Brando, you find yourself, your eye drifts over to him because he was charismatic and he was often kind of stoic in his performances, but he was always truthful. And that's the thing. I asked him about playing this character in a movie. He played a judge in a movie called The Judge. And he was not a good man. He was not a good guy. And I said, what's it like playing a mean character? Some absolutely asinine question like that. And he said, I don't play mean characters. I play people. I cannot judge the people that I'm playing. All I can do is find the truthfulness in the character and cut out all the stuff that doesn't feel truthful. That's how I approach the work. And he was 80, at the time of this interview, he was about 85 years old. And I said, hey, are you going to, what's your next project? And he listed off a bunch of stuff that he wanted to get done. And then he said, you know what? And I've got it right here. He said, I'm just going to keep doing this before they wipe the drool away from me, until they wipe the drool away from me. So he had a sense of humor, and he was a great actor, and remains the only time, really, that I have felt starstruck.
Oh, well, and you know what? I will do what his family wants and what he wishes. I will continue to go see the movies. And you know what? I'm going to make sure that they're Canadian as well, because what we're talking about today is this idea that, in the last year, we have not been going to the movies and seeing Canadian films. And so I will take the spirit of Robert Duvall and attempt to correct this.
Now, it should be noted, because I know someone out there watching this will say, Robert Duvall didn't like filming in Canada. He wanted to film in America. I know. He's an American actor that wanted to work in his home country. Today, we're talking about Canadians, Elbows Up, which, of course, I think most of us know anyway. Mike Myers on Saturday Night Live wore the T-shirt that became kind of a catchphrase and blazed a trail across the country, when there was talk of the 54 states and all that kind of thing reverberating in all of our ears. And it became something that we're all talked about. And we started, being very careful about the products that we bought in shopping, grocery stores. In Ontario, they took American booze off the shelves at the liquor store, the LCBO, which is the single biggest purchaser of liquor in the world. And so, we've looked at creating, a Canadian kind of vibe to everything we do. And yet a study comes out that says that there was a 40% drop in the attendance of Canadian movies this year. Now, as we sit today and talk about this, one of the movies that's doing really well in theaters is a Canadian movie called Nirvana, the band, the show, the movie, which is hilarious. Go see it. I love it. It's a crowd pleaser. It's doing well both in Canada and the United States. So happy for Matt Johnson and Jane McCarroll, the stars and kind of creative force behind all of that. And Heated Rivalry, of course, has become a worldwide phenomenon and is an all-Canadian production. But there are a lot of other movies that are made and released, and I see most of them, and I review most of them, that audiences, for some reason, just haven't been responding to. And I think it is partially because people aren't going to the movies in the numbers that they once did, and which I think, quite honestly is, I don't know if it's temporary, but I do know that in the last year or so, just overall, we're not talking about Canadian movies here right now, but overall, it's been shown that the people that are going to movies now are young people. Everyone said, young people, they're on streaming and they're not bothering with going to the movies. No, young people are going to the movies and older people are going to the movies. It's that sort of middle ground that haven't really returned. I think they probably will at some point. But for me, I have to wonder why our elbows aren't up as we are thinking about Canadian cinema and Canadian art. It is a bit of a bafflement to me.
It is interesting because, like, the numbers do, like, I thought, okay, sure. But when you look at the numbers, it actually is like, yeah, it's kind of alarming, the fall. Like, Canadian film revenues fell 40% in 2025 compared to 2024. So that's 13 million from 23 million. That's a huge amount of money that we're just losing from in the film industry. And then so you think, okay, so like, what are the percentages of Canadian films? Homegrown titles captured 1.7% of the domestic market in 2025 compared to 2.8 in 2024. So again, almost half.
Mm-hmm.
And you look at the movies, great movies in both years. I looked.
I mean, we tend to make different kinds of movies in Canada. We don't have, for Canadian productions, and it's true that a lot of American productions are done here that are done on a very large scale. Mm-hmm. But Canadian movies that we would, consider to be truly Canadian tend to be smaller. They tend to be character-based dramas. Emotional, but because we don't spend $200 million on a movie here, we tend to adjust our storytelling to fit the kinds of budgets that we make movies on. So they are smaller. They're not the crazy big movies that you see have those big standees, those big like movie posters and almost like art installations at the movie theaters.
Right.
We rarely ever get all that. The marketing tends to be a little less sexy, maybe because sexy marketing costs a whole lot of money. And unless you're Nirvana, the band, the show, the movie, which has done an amazing job of getting out there and really making sure that people know about this, it's hard to get the word out. And, so we're talking about those movies. We're talking about movies that are smaller in scale, but just as rewarding as any big, large-scale, action movie or something. I often say in a lot of Canadian movies that I review, maybe not a lot of action, but the real fireworks, that's in the dialogue, that's in the situations, that's in the characters. We do that really well here.
Really well. And often, like, they're really challenging films, which is hard to get people in the theaters to see films that aren't necessarily like your feel good films, right?
Right.
So Blue Heron was a film that won awards at TIFF
Yeah.
and had like really, really great reviews. Very powerful film. It's not a feel good popcorn bucket type of film. So how do you, and I do think that is because of just our kind of culture, and also when you're working with organizations like the National Film Board and you're getting tax credits and you're doing things with a purpose, sometimes the work feels a little like heavier. The short, The Girl Who Cried Pearls, I think it's nominated for an Oscar for Canada for
Yep.
the shorts this year. And again, it's so incredible. It's claymation, so the amount of work, even just in each one frame, it's
Yeah.
one of the most beautiful movies. And you can just see it's unparalleled, unmatched in terms of the scale of the artistry and what these people are dealing with. But again, it's like it's dealing with a lot. It's a challenging it's like about oppression and tough times. And I feel like, yeah, like culturally we do this as Canada. So I do think Nirvana, the show, the band, the movie is a really interesting case study to kind of compare and to look at and say, okay, yeah, they're doing wild things with a small budget.
Yep.
Like they're doing really, really creative things, right? And then, yeah, this idea that like they're doing the whole marketing campaign. It's coming with like they are showing up in an RV to screenings, and
Which is
they're
a
really.
crucial part of the movie. The RV is a very important part of the film.
So I think, how can we make things more experiential, especially too if we're tackling heavy topics? I think
Yep.
that's like where my mind goes in terms of like these conversations. Heated rivalry, if we're looking at the success of that, so people don't have to buy tickets and leave their home for this, but it also is very experiential. I hosted a Heated Rivalry trivia night at The Drink on Church Street with Queer Nerds United. What's better than that? What's better than Queer Nerds United? And I got there and they were telling me like it was one of 3 Heated Rivalry trivia nights in the city. And so I think a lot of it has to do with like, how do we make these experiences feel like communal, concert like? Sookie and Lee told me that Paying for It, a Canadian film,
Yep.
it was released in 2024, but they're touring it like a book now in 2026.
And I think that's so clever. That's what a lot of filmmakers years ago used to do. John Waters used to do what he called, and Kevin Smith still does it sometimes. They
Faves.
four-wall it, what they call they four-wall it. And so they rent theaters, they go out and they make events of it. And so Kevin Smith, when he rolls in with a new film, he'll get up, he'll speak beforehand. There's merch, there's all that kind of stuff, and it is an interesting way that feels organic and feels kind of authentic, and more than anything else, feels personal. And maybe that's something we have to do. I hosted the movie The Well. I had the cast like Sheila McCarthy. I had the director Hubert Davis, who is a great guy, Oscar-nominated short film director, a documentary filmmaker. This is his narrative debut. And, we had a full house for the first night and a pretty much full house for the Q&A on the second night. And the movie went on to do well. But I think that Hubert got out there and he went from city to city. He turned up. They made events out of this sort of thing. And I think this is what we have to do. The Well is a small movie. It is a dystopian film that isn't like Mad Max or, one of those big, the Hunger Games or anything that has billions of dollars to spend on costumes and cars that burst into flames and electric guitars that are flamethrowers and all that stuff. This is a story about how people respond when something terrible, like, hey, all the water's poisoned in the world, and now we only have this well that this family uses, and it's broken. What do we do now? That, to me, is a pretty compelling question to ask about how we would respond. That's what we do in Canada. We don't make Mad Max, we make The Well. And if we market it properly, though, I think there's no reason why people shouldn't go.
That's exactly right. I love that. And yeah, I was there that night, and and that's how movies used to feel, because there was less options, and just the movie itself felt like an event. But now it does it gives you goosebumps again when you're there. You get to hear from the director a little bit. It adds a little context. And like these are auteurs. Like when you say John Waters and Kevin Smith, it's so funny. Every week I realize what a nerd I am because every time we talk about something, I'm like, that's my favorite thing ever. Okay, so I know I already said Mike Myers was my favorite.
Yeah.
Now I'm going to say Kevin Smith and John Waters are my favorite, but so it's a competitive market out there, and those American productions are filming in Canada. So I still feel like, oh my God, I need to see these movies that were made here and made, even people that I know and artists that I appreciate have worked on this film, but those aren't like Canadian movies, and they're getting tax credits and all this stuff. So it's a murky kind of complicated thing we're talking about.
Well, it is. And I mean, and there's so many moving parts to it. There is the fact that people aren't going to independent films as much as they used to. And, virtually all Canadian films are independent films. So, that's an issue that people are saying, oh, you know what? I'll watch it on streaming. This is the kind of thing that I'll find on streaming, which is a great ancillary market, secondary market, like DVDs used to be and things, not as profitable, but at least, you can get eyes on a film and you can get a stream, some sort of financial stream coming in through streaming as well. That's all good, except that I hate this idea that, oh, I'll just wait and see it on streaming because you're a nerd for Mike Myers and for Kevin Smith and for lots of other things. I'm a nerd for movie theaters. I love going to a movie theater and seeing a movie on the screen that the filmmaker wanted me to see it on, the size, the picture, the sound, all that stuff. And I love being part of the community of people that is sitting in the audience. We're all sitting one way, looking at a thing that's in front of us, and we're laughing or we're crying or we're gasping if it's a horror film, whatever. We're all responding together. I love that. So while streaming has a place in terms of getting Canadian films out there and in many cases helping to finance them, for me, it's also this double-edged sword because I think that people are saying, well, we'll just wait till it goes on, whatever streaming service it might happen to end up on. And that is making it less interesting and less sexy to go to a movie theater, which is always the better way to see something.
Totally, totally agree. And that's why I feel like a little guilty of this myself because like if you're listening, I am not calling anybody out because I am right there with you. I need to be waiting like again, the Oscars, I needed to see all the Oscar nominated pictures, right? And it's like I'm sure in these last couple weeks there was a small independent Canadian film that I could have seen instead. So I'm definitely guilty of this myself. I'm gonna try to course correct. And as you were thinking, is it the double-edged sword of because we do streaming so well and maybe there was a lot of great stuff to stream last year. And
I mean, there's that. I think that there is also, in terms of elbows up and in terms of supporting Canadian art and Canadian work. I mean, if you are on YouTube, it's not hard to find Canadian content on YouTube. And again, it's not streaming. It's something else again. It's something else different. But, you're not, just because you're not going to the movie theaters to see Canadian films doesn't mean that you're not supporting Canadian stuff. If you're watching it at home and if you're YouTubing and all that kind of stuff, it means that you are not supporting one aspect of it.
Right.
And it's an aspect of it, though, that is very important to me. And it's an aspect of it that, to me, feels like it gets an unfair rap. There was a time when, I've been doing this a long time. I've been reviewing movies for a very long time. And there was a time when you'd say, oh, a movie's Canadian, and be like, oh, it's not going to be that good then. It's not going to be, And then, but I think about the films that I love, the Canadian films that I love. And I mean, the list goes on and on and on. But like Hardcore Logo is such a cool movie that is individual, could only be made here, is something that still, 30 years, is it 30 years? Maybe 25, 30 years since it came out, still seems like cool and hip and sort of, completely worth the effort that it would take to have a look at it. Last Night, Don McKellar's great film, is a movie that I watch, at least once a year and on a theater. So if you're careful, you can find it at one of the rep cinemas around town, and I will go see that on a big screen anytime. And these are movies that were made with small budgets, that were made by inventive filmmakers that were trying to do something different, that were trying to break away from the kinds of films I think that were being made in this country overwhelmingly at that moment. And they did, and they created this whole kind of like Canadian new wave of filmmaking and films that I think hold up extremely well now. So, it's not like, we don't make good movies here. We do. We make great movies here. It is, and now we're making still lots of them. It's never been easier to make a movie because of advances in digital technology and all that sort of thing. It's never been easier to make them. Maybe a little bit harder to see them.
Right. Yeah.
That's the thing.
Yeah. And, now that we're coming from that perspective, and I'm thinking back to the things that we're saying, like, why is the grocery store? Well, those things are clear cut. You have the little sign, and it's a little easier to.
Well, and you have to eat.
You have to eat.
You
Yes.
got to eat. So going to the grocery store makes sense. Whereas, today, as we sit here talking about this, there's an ice storm raging
Yes.
outside my window here. And so, you might look at that and go, man, if you're hungry, you'll brave that to go to the grocery store.
Yeah.
But
No
if you're
replicators
thinking,
yet.
But I may not brave that to go see a movie.
Yeah, exactly. Especially when you could just order a movie on your
Yeah.
television, watch another season of Real Housewives, So we're not judging. We're not judging. We've been there as well. Okay, actually, I was looking 2026 Canadian movies, and
Yes.
there is one called The Stunt Driver with Jay Farrow, and it's a Michael Dowse film, so like the
Michael
FUBAR
Dowse.
guy.
Yep. Yep.
That could
And
be
loads
huge.
of other movies too. Yeah, no, it could be like there are things that seem to just hit every now and again. So the Nirvana, the band, the show, the movie has hit, and Blackberry hit. When I was hearing about that movie with the great Jay Baruchel,
I said
yeah,
Jay Farrow.
yeah,
Also, a big Jay Farrow fan too.
yeah,
But
yeah. I like Jay Farrow too, but Jay Baruchel. When you think about that, when I first heard about that movie, I thought, a movie about an iPhone, essentially. Like, I don't know how much interest I have in that. And then I saw it, absolutely blew me away. And I interviewed Jay and the director, Matt Johnson, who is also the director of Nirvana. And Jay said, yeah, you don't expect a movie about a smartphone to be like the Battle of Algiers, but it is. And he's absolutely correct. And, that's a movie that deserved all the accolades that it got. That's a movie that deserved the audience that it found. And, I just wish we could do it more often. And every now and again, something, cracks through and splits open people's ideas of what a Canadian film could be.
Yeah.
I've heard The Mermaid Singing, the great Patricia Rozema movie from 1987, was a film that was made for absolutely no money, but so inventive, so interesting, such a great performance from Sheila McCarthy. And, I was in Victoria, BC a couple of weeks ago, and I hosted a thing with Sheila McCarthy for her new film, The Dancing on the Elephant. But then afterwards, we did an hour-long interview, and a good chunk of the running time of that interview was spent talking about I've heard The Mermaid Singing, and the audience was so into it. And afterwards, people were like, I love that movie. It changed me, my ideas about what a Canadian movie could be. So it happens every now and again. Or you get something like, Crazy from Jean-Marc Vallée, or, Rhymes for Young Ghouls by Jeff Barnaby, the late, great Jeff Barnaby. And you have these incredible films that are just sitting there waiting to be discovered. And sometimes when they are discovered, they really break through. Now, this is in English Canada. It's a whole other podcast to talk about what happens in Quebec, where they've embraced Quebec films.
Right.
There is no reticence to go see a Quebec film in Quebec, a French language Quebec film, like
That's
we seem
incredible.
to, bump into so often in the rest of the country.
Yeah, I think I've thought about the star system. Cameron Bailey has mentioned to me when I was asking him like what is missing in the Canadian media landscape, and his first comment was it's not missing in Quebec. So
Right.
whatever we can do, like there needs to be some massive straight up research projects on how we can take what they're doing in Quebec in terms of their star system and getting people to feel compelled to get into the theaters and kind of like try to apply that across the board. But you brought up a good thing. Or a interesting point that made me think. So is it, you mentioned that Canadian films used to kind of be seen as just, oh, it's Canadian, so it's going to just be kind of subpar.
Well,
And
we were really rough on a lot of our art forms. You know, when I was a radio DJ in Nova Scotia, people would be like, "Oh," they'd phone in, "Oh, that sounded pretty good for a Canadian
yeah,
record,"
we're so
or the same. Yeah,
like that on ourselves, right? And I wonder if that will ever end, this idea that we see Canadian art in terms of like with the little asterisks, like it's good for Canadian. And so you've seen a shift. Has it kind of been progress this whole time? Was there an era that there was a jump? Or do you see us kind of just leaning in and just making art? It doesn't have to be Canadian art, it can just be a good movie.
yeah. I mean, there have been periods when Canadian movies have really broken through. You know, the decline of the American Empire from Denis Arcand was a movie that really got people talking. Mummy by Xavier Dolan. David Cronenberg. I could go on for hours about how much I love his movies and how much of an impact they've made on audiences, not only here, but around the world. From I mean, I love all the sort of the early ones, but Videodrome is a movie that for me is, even though it stars Deborah Harry and James Wood, is still for me a Canadian movie just because of its ethos, and it was made here, and it was made by a Canadian genius who has a lot to say about Canadian culture and does so within his art. So David Cronenberg absolutely breaks through. Adam McGoyan, The Sweet Hereafter, movies like that every now and again come along that break through. But we have this kind of tall poppy syndrome in Canada where, we like to cut people down if they get a little bit too big or what we consider too big. And we started off this conversation talking about Mike Myers, and maybe we'll bring it around to finish up by talking about Mike a little bit. And I remember an interview that he did where he said, when the time came to make the decision, are you going to stay here in Canada, or are you going to go to England, which he did for a little while, or are you going to go to the United States? And he ultimately ended up in the United States, and of course, the rest is history, Saturday Night Live and all that sort of thing. But he said the difference was, in America, they ask, who do you want to be? In Canada, they ask, who do you think you are?
Mm, mm.
And, so maybe there's an element of that in terms of us getting in and really full-throatedly supporting Canadian art and Canadian movies and that kind of thing. Maybe, the pandemic didn't do anybody any favors in many businesses. I'm glad that I don't own a movie theater, a restaurant, or a brick and mortar store right now. So, there's lots of things here, but this 40% drop in support for Canadian movies is troubling. And it is the kind of thing that I think is worthy of. We've spent almost an hour talking about it now, but it's worth that conversation and a further conversation as to why and what we can do about it. This is an age-old, people have been having this ever since we started threading films through cameras here in Canada. People have had conversations about how do we get Canadians to embrace their own art, and their own films. And, everyone's got a slightly different opinion. For me, I'd like to think that you just treat a movie as a movie. Don't think of it as a Canadian movie first. Don't think of it as, whatever. Just saying, like, I want to go see a great story, well told, that will move me, that'll make me think, that'll make me laugh, whatever it might be. The word Canadian, while it would be nice if we could, chalk that up to that, but it doesn't necessarily have to enter into the conversation. Just go see these movies because more often than not, they're really good.
Absolutely. We have the talent out there. The films are there. Maybe the government should take a little bit less for the military budget coming up and invest more in Canadian films. That would be helpful. And I think we can course correct here. I don't think it's out of a lack of desire. It's definitely not out of a lack of good films. And the thing with Heated Rivalry, even though it's a TV show and even though it was streaming, the creators did a really good job of making sure that even though it's a global show, it doesn't just take place in Canada. There's Russian characters, there's American characters, they're in the Olympics, but it's about being created here with Canadian producers, create people like infrastructure and stuff. And Jacob Tierney has said, all these American celebrities are asking, can I be in season 2?
Yeah.
And he said, no, we're going to continue to foster local small talent. And like, that is what you need to do. And so this idea that I think that helps clear that murkiness that we're talking about, like what's Canadian, how do I support? So now that when these Canadian films do come out, we have this kind of like cultural shorthand for these things now because of Heated Rivalry. And I am teasing out, I think there's going to be another Heated Rivalry type show that does this well. Crave is coming out soon with a series called Slow Pitch. And it's like a lesbian softball series. So
I don't know anything about it.
It could be Heated Rivalry all round too. I'm a big Frasier fan. Okay, so
Niles Crane, one of the greatest characters ever on television.
100%, 100%. That's the truth. And Martin Crane. Okay, we could do a whole episode on Frasier.
Maybe we will.
The reboot stars this really incredible Canadian performer whose name is Jessica Salguero. And she's going to be in Slow Pitch. And
oh, great.
So I'm telling you, I have this feeling about it. They're being very kind of like, they have an Instagram page, but there's only one post. They're being very calculated. And I feel like this is going to be the next big thing. But also Canadian films, I'm going to do my part to get out there and see them in theaters. And let's make sure 2026 numbers are better than 2025 numbers.
Yeah, I think Nirvana, the band, the show, the movie, has already kind of started things off in a pretty good way. We're only February right now, the middle of February, and that movie is already making some money. So it's a promising start to the year. We just have to continue throughout the rest of the year.
That's right. And those listening should continue to listen to us weekly, subscribe, follow us wherever you listen to your podcasts or on YouTube and Substack TV.
Good talking to you.
Good talking to you, Richard.